All right, well, Mark chapter 12 this morning is where we're going to be. If you got a Bible and can meet me there, Mark chapter 12. And as you're finding that, let me take just a quick second. I saw several college students starting to trickle in. If you're a college student in town again or here for the first time, welcome. We are so glad that you guys are here. Just praying for a really great year for you, and whether you're navigating or preparing to navigate your first couple of weeks on your own as a college student or you're back in town, make sure you stop by the Next Step Center after the service is over and touch base with those guys. You can meet our college team and hear about all the stuff that's going on campus these days. Just a lot going on, and glad you guys are here. Welcome back. So we're in Mark 12 today. We've been working our way through the Gospel of Mark for the better part of the year, talking about Jesus' life from birth through resurrection through the eyes of Peter. And one of the things I love about Mark, and we've said this before, is that it answers the question that all of us that are even remotely familiar with the story of Peter have. So you know when Peter starts this story, he's from this guy from nowhere. He's a redneck fisherman with a foot-shaped mouth that can't seem to stay out of his own way, and yet over 3.5 years transforms into a person that is almost universally admired 2,000 years later. And it's not just him, it's a whole bunch of men and women, ordinary people from really diverse backgrounds, who at the beginning of the story couldn't have liked each other, and they weren't even sure that they liked Jesus at all. And yet over time, and their time specifically with Jesus, they transform into people that increasingly look like him. And so specifically, we've been asking in this section of Mark, how in the world does that happen? And you're here this morning for the last passage of that section that contains two illustrations that really sum up everything that Jesus has done and taught over the last few chapters, showing these people and people like us how to do more than just like Jesus, how to become the kind of people who increasingly live and lead and love like Jesus when the rubber hits the road in real everyday life. But before we talk about Jesus and looking like him, I thought it would be helpful for us this morning to talk about Elvis. So you probably know this, but either from a karaoke bar or a show in Vegas or a birthday party gone weird, that there is a whole subculture of people in the world who have devoted a surprising amount of their lives to becoming like Elvis. Elvis impersonators, a whole thing, and there's a whole subculture of people, and it's a really broad spectrum if you've ever experienced this. Some of them are really, really bad. Like uncomfortably bad, even to look at. Like it's a guy that looks absolutely nothing like Elvis, wearing a black wig that he bought on Amazon and a white jumpsuit that's somehow too tight and too loose all at the same time. I don't know how that happens. But if you've ever encountered one of those people, like you watch their act and you just think all along, like, dude, I don't have any idea who you are, but I am totally certain who you're not, right? But there's another group of Elvis impersonators that are incredible. They've studied everything about Elvis. Like the hair is right, the glasses are right, the clothes, the voice inflections, the little lip thing they do, like the way that he moved. They've studied all of the concerts that Elvis ever did. They know exactly how Elvis Presley held a microphone and exactly how he moved his body in response to something that the band does at every moment of the song. And you can find yourself in those moments where if he's really good, like the right lighting, the right music, you're sitting just far enough back in the theater for a few seconds, you can kind of forget that it's not him. And yet even then, nobody walks out of the theater after an act like that saying, dude, like I'm convinced all of a sudden Elvis really is alive. And I just saw him, like he hasn't aged a bit since the 1960s. Like nobody does that. Because no matter how convincing the impersonation becomes, all of us know something sort of instinctively. Performing like someone on stage is not the same as becoming like them in real everyday life, which is probably worth thinking a little about as we get to the end of this section of Mark that we've called Like Jesus. Because for the last several weeks, we've been talking about becoming more and more like Jesus. But what exactly do we mean by that? Because if we're not careful, discipleship, the art of following Jesus and becoming more like Jesus, can become a little like trying really hard to do a convincing Jesus impersonation. You learn the language, you learn when to say what and how. You articulate all his opinions on all of the issues of the day when you're put on the stage in public. You dress the part, you learn the songs, you develop some good mannerisms, like you learn the moment to put your hands up when everybody else raises their hands so you don't go early, right? You have mic drop answers to everyone's questions so that when you speak up, everybody goes, I have a friend who goes here who grew up in a predominantly black church. She told me one time, like, at Doxology, sometimes I just want to shout. I'm like, well, bring it, go for it, And she's like, no, I can't shout because I've learned at the Bible church, you don't shout, you moo. Yeah, I said, sorry, I thought you said moo, like a cow. She said, no, that's exactly what I mean. Like when the Spirit moves at Doxology or in a Bible church, the preacher says something good, people don't shout, they go, So impersonating Jesus, you learn how to talk so people moo. And look, none of those things is necessarily bad. In fact, a lot of the things we learn to do as followers of Jesus are really good things, but here's the uncomfortable possibility. You can get really good at appearing devoted to God without actually becoming anything like Jesus at all. Because impersonation, it always works from the outside in. You get the clothes right, get the voice right, get the mannerisms right, like everything that everybody can see, hoping that your external reality convinces everybody around you and ultimately transforms your internal reality. But over and over and over, Jesus has been inviting us to become like him in exactly the opposite direction. In fact, look at Mark chapter 12, beginning in verse 38. It says, as he taught, Jesus said, watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, to have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. Okay, so pause and think about this for just a second, where we're at in the story. Jesus and his disciples have just made their way into Jerusalem for what we know will be the final time. He's got less than a week of life left on earth in this moment. The time to teach the crowd and his disciples for how to live when he's gone is down to hours and minutes before Roman soldiers are going to come carry him away to a cross. And Jesus knows this. Right? Nothing catches Jesus by surprise. Well, we know this. So doesn't this warning catch us a little by surprise? Of all the things that the crowd and the disciples need to watch out for in the moments and hours and days ahead, Jesus looks at them and says, you guys watch out for those Bible teachers. I mean, maybe I'm a teeny bit biased, but if your life is in danger, you've got literally a few hours left with the people that you love, family or close friends or community group whose lives are going to be in danger too in just a matter of hours and minutes. Are religious people going to be the first people on your watch out list? I mean, I imagine some of you would say, absolutely they would be. Like religious people and specifically religious leaders are part of the reason some of you are out on following Jesus. Like the way that they treated you, or treated your family, or something they said, or the way they said it about people like you or people that you love. You're like, yeah, watch out for those religious leaders first. That's got to be on the top of the list. Those guys are bad. And look, I hear that. I hate that. But don't miss this. At least with a certain kind of religious leader, you and Jesus are on the same page. And my predecessor, Ken Horton, used to say this all the time. He's totally right. Don't reject Jesus over someone or something that you and he are together on. So maybe a few of us would be right in line with Jesus from the outset on this, watch out. The rest of us wouldn't. But maybe should pay a little more attention to the people that we follow and what Jesus is so concerned about here so that we can watch out for it too, if it's that big a deal to Jesus. What's Jesus so concerned about? Well, the average person in Jesus' day wouldn't have seen religious leaders as people to watch out for. To the average person in Jesus' day, the religious teachers, the teacher of the law, they didn't appear to be dangerous. They appeared to be the most devoted people anybody knew. Like, these are the guys who knew their Bibles. They explained the Bible. They could answer all of your questions about the most important things of life. They knew the commandments. In fact, they deliberately come up with these systems to make sure that they added commands in front of the actual commands so they could never even get close to breaking the commands of God. So, for example, like we always want to know in New Testament church, like, do I have to tithe? Because tithing's not commanded in the New Testament. We know this, yeah? Like, it's not commanded in the New Testament. But if do I have to? And even if I was to determine I'm going to be a percentage giver, is that off gross or net income that's required of me? Those are the questions that we ask, right? We find out in other places these guys had set up a system to tithe off of their spice rack. So I'm just going to go on a limb and say nobody in the room today went out to Tom Thumb this week or H-E-B and bought cumin and took the cumin home and said, okay, before I use this, I need to figure out a way to take the first and best of this, carve it off the top, and give it to God. Like, these guys were devoted all the way to their spice rack in a visible way. It showed everybody how devoted they were. Jesus says they loved walking around in these long flowing robes. There wasn't anything wrong with walking around in a robe. They wore distinctive clothing that communicated something about what they did. The problem was, Jesus said, that what they did wasn't who they were. They made sure that they never went to Walmart in gym shorts and a t-shirt like normal people because of the perks that came with the robe wherever they went. Like, they loved being recognized in public for what they did. They loved walking through the grocery store and hearing somebody say, Rabbi. Like, their robe gave them a fast pass to all of life's greatest moments. Everywhere they went. Got them to the front of the line, the VIP table in the places that they went. So they never left home without the robes. But what did Jesus notice? Jesus notices about these people and he calls out, the clothes are right. The mannerisms are right. The language is right. They knew all the songs. When they walked into a room, everybody thought, that guy is the real deal devoted. And Jesus says, now watch out. That's just a dude wearing a robe. And notice the problem wasn't that they were doing religious things. The problem was that somewhere along the way, things that were supposed to be an expression of their devotion had become the object of their devotion. Instead of devotion to God, they'd become devoted to the applause and the respect of all of the people around them. The most dangerous counterfeit of devotion is devotion that actually pays off publicly. It gets you the recognition. People are wowed at how spiritual you seem. And yet underneath the robe is a different story. Jesus says that's the case with these teachers of the law. You want to know how I know? Look at what happens when nobody's applauding. Look at verse 40. He says, they devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. So you notice the combination there? Long prayers, devoured widows, public devotion, private destruction. They prided themselves on how profound their prayers sounded, but they privately took advantage of the most vulnerable people around them in order to get more for themselves. And Jesus says, don't confuse performance with the person underneath. And it's not just a warning about them. It's an invitation for us. Here's the warning. You can look devoted to God without being a disciple of Jesus. You can look devoted to God without being a disciple of Jesus. And it's terribly easy, especially in Texas, isn't it? Like to fill up your social calendar and your Instagram reel and your home decor and even interpersonal conversations in ways that can even build social capital and influence in the world where we live. And the robes look great, but it can be dangerous to your spiritual health. And Jesus says to people around you, if you don't have anything under that robe. See, that's the thing with an impersonator. It's not that they're doing bad things or that they're bad at what they're doing. Sometimes they're doing really good things in an incredibly convincing way. But that's what makes this warning so necessary. Jesus isn't just warning us about the TV preachers whose hypocrisy is obvious. He's warning about something that can be a temptation for every single one of us. All of us can be tempted to become so proficient at the practices of following Jesus that we mistake proficiency for intimacy. Look, I've been doing this long enough. I know how to look devoted when I'm not, when I don't feel devoted. Like, I assume you've got that figured out too. Or if you don't have that figured out yet, you're well on your way in a world like ours. Look, I can read scripture for something to say instead of someone to hear. I can serve people in ways that look extraordinarily self-sacrificial because I know what it will cause them to say about me or think about me when I do. It is entirely possible to stand right here and to talk about becoming like Jesus while willingly resisting everything Jesus is leading to in areas of my heart that nobody else can see. I've got that in me, and you've got that in you. And that's Jesus' point about the scribes. If that's a trap that the most respectable, honorable, seemingly devoted people you know, watch out for them. But at least as vigilantly, Jesus is saying, watch out for you too. Does that make you a little uncomfortable? Me too. So let's move on and get out of there. No, let's deal with it. Jesus says, watch out. So how? How do you watch out for that? How do you know whether or not you're actually becoming like Jesus or just mastering the art of impersonation? Because the truth is, it is incredibly hard to see in ourselves or to lead other people towards. Because the whole point that Jesus is making is about something that none of us can see. So Pete Scazzero is a pastor in New York City. He's written a ton of really helpful books trying to get to the heart of this for individuals and for those of us that are trying to figure this out together. He uses the image of an iceberg. So you know this about icebergs. There's a part of the iceberg that appears above the surface. But generally, it's only about 10% of the iceberg that appears above the waterline. 90% of the iceberg is below the surface, completely invisible. And that 90%, if it gets ignored, that tends to be the part that sinks ships, right? The problem is most of us spent enormous energy managing what's above the surface because it's the part that everybody else can see. It's what they can see in us. It's what we can see in everybody else. So we tend to follow Jesus by beginning to work on the 10% that everybody can see and hope that it trickles down to the 90% that nobody can see. We do this in other people. We do it in ourselves. The problem is we spend so much energy managing what's above the surface. We work on the 10% and we ignore the 90%. Jesus starts somewhere else. And he's about to show us. Because while everybody else is watching the people who are making sure that they're being watched there in the temple in Jerusalem, Jesus sits down out of the way and he starts watching a woman that nobody else could see. Look at verse 41. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were. Watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts. But a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling the disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she gave out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. Her whole life, literally, is what Jesus says." You notice that? Jesus starts where nobody else looks. Jesus starts where nobody else looks. And don't rush past the first 3 words of verse 41. It says Jesus sat down. Jesus is done arguing for the moment. He's not moving to the front and center seat on the stage where all the religious leaders are about to start the show. He goes to the other side of the room and he sits down and begins to watch. And apparently there's plenty to watch. Mark says the rich people are putting in large amounts. And remember this is not Apple Pay. This is not automate the important through online giving, right? They're putting coins into metal receptacles. So I'm just imagining, if you got a lot to give, if I got a lot to give, I'm not just gently placing that in one at a time. That's not what was happening. Like I'm looking for a little altitude in the giving. dropping it in there. Let those things echo through the temple, right? I mean, it's crossed my mind. You go to the bank beforehand, you give $1,000, change it to quarters, right? So you can really make some sound there and get noticed. You're not just sliding a folded check into the offering box there. And everybody looks at these rich people giving and goes, whoa, like look at the amount of their devotion. But then this woman walks up, a widow, poor, vulnerable. She puts in 2 coins, less than a penny. Almost literally nothing to see. And that's exactly what Jesus sees. Isn't that interesting? The scribes have spent their lives trying to get people to look and see how much they look like God. She's not looking to get anyone to notice her. And she's exactly who Jesus looks at. Like everybody else can see the 2 coins, Jesus sees what the 2 coins reveal. Everybody else sees what she puts in. Jesus sees who she's become. He starts where nobody else looks, which is both a little uncomfortable and unbelievably freeing for us to know. It's uncomfortable because it's a little reminder. Jesus sees through every version of me that I've learned to disguise with the robe. And it's freeing because it means he sees every quiet work of grace that nobody else is going to ever appreciate or notice or applaud. The prayer that nobody hears, he hears. The temptation that you resist, that nobody knows you faced. The forgiveness that you offer that was far more costly than anybody else had any idea. The ordinary Tuesday morning when you took a step of obedience towards something you knew he was inviting you into and nobody else noticed or even knew. They certainly didn't clap or applaud. Nobody else may notice any of that. Jesus starts where nobody else looks. But does that mean what happens above the surface doesn't matter at all? Not even almost. In fact, that's what the 2 coins show. They show up on the surface, right? But they don't show up as a demonstration of something. They show up as a revelation of something. And that's different. Okay, let me say it positively. True devotion, this is what Jesus is after. It's about revelation, not demonstration. And that may feel like a distinction without a difference, but those 2 things are actually worlds apart. Demonstration begins above the surface with what I'm hoping that everybody else is going to see. Revelation starts with something that's already become true about me, even before it's anything that anybody can see. I mean, think about a fruit tree. Like it's really simple to make an apple tree look fruitful and healthy in just a few minutes with a trip to the grocery store and some string. That's demonstration. But nobody imagines those apples are going to stay healthy on the tree or somehow become a part of the tree itself. Real fruit works in the opposite direction. Something happening beneath the surface, sometimes for months. The roots taking in water when nobody's watching. Nutrients moving through the tree far below the bark. And eventually what's been happening where nobody can see gets revealed in ways that are impossible to miss. That's what these 2 coins are for this woman. Like it's not just about the money. So if you were hoping for a good offering sermon where we ask you to give again later in the service, sorry to disappoint you. That's not where we're going today. I mean, giving and generosity is an obvious illustration of this. But the point that Jesus is after goes way deeper than that. He's not inviting us into a life where we hang decorations on our life to demonstrate our devotion. He's inviting us to cultivate what's underneath so that our inner life can support and ultimately show something that's been happening all along when the right moment or the right season appears. True devotion. It's about revelation, not demonstration. Now, you can decorate a tree from the outside, but only life on the inside will support and produce the fruit that lasts. And maybe that gives us a really simple way to respond this morning. For centuries, followers of Jesus have practiced something that sometimes gets called the discipline of secrecy. That's exactly what it sounds like, without any of the sinister implications of secrecy. It's the discipline of intentionally doing things in response to your life with Jesus that you're pretty sure nobody else is ever going to know about. Not because you're ashamed of it, not because everything good ought to be hidden, Jesus makes this woman's secret act an object lesson for us. So it's not the idea that everything good can ever be shown. It's based on the idea that sometimes the very best way to figure out who you're doing something for is to remove everybody else from the audience. So what if you cultivated that discipline in at least one area of your life this week? Like give something to someone that you don't put your name on. Serve someone who can't return the favor or give you credit for it. Spend some time with Jesus and don't post the verse that you read. Take a step of obedience that may never become a part of a story that you tell. Quietly set your alarm. Wake up a little bit earlier to spend time with Jesus, but without a big explanation to everybody else in your house. Not forever, and maybe not in everything, but just as an exercise and letting Jesus do some work in you below the surface. Because maybe the question at the end of this whole section of the Gospel of Mark that we've called like Jesus isn't how much more like Jesus do I look to all of the people around me. It's how is Jesus forming me to be like him in the areas that nobody else may ever see. In those secret places first. Because Jesus' invitation is not to become better Jesus impersonators. His invitation is to follow him, to be his disciples. And when Jesus is genuinely changing what's underneath, we don't have to manufacture stuff above the surface. The fruit will reveal itself. Would you bow your head with me? You know, Jesus says about this woman, she put in everything, literally her whole life. And within just a few days, Jesus would too. She's not just an example of devotion that Jesus wants you to try harder to imitate. She's a picture of the one who would do it perfectly. Not just to demonstrate how devoted he is for the crowd. In fact, the crowd will mock him for it. He gave himself completely to reveal who he is. That's who he is. He's a God who wants a relationship with you. So the response today isn't go try harder to be like the widow. It's entrust your life to the Jesus who gave his life for you so that he could give his life to you, to make you new from the inside out, to live out his purpose to reveal who he is through you. And I don't know what that looks like for you today, but it may be a response that says, Jesus, I've spent a whole life trying to work my way to you by living from the outside in. And I've come to the realization that I can't do it. I need a savior. I need a rescuer. I need someone who would give their life for me and give life to me. I need somebody that would make it possible. That's why Jesus came. He lived a perfect life. He took the consequence of the life lived apart from the life giver, death. And then he went into a grave and he came out of the grave to offer you his life. And it's offered to you as a gift. You can receive it right where you're at. It's as simple as telling him, Jesus, I'm trusting you and your performance over me and mine, and I'm asking, Lord, that you would change me from the inside out and make me new. I'm trusting that your promise is true, that you will, and I'm receiving the life that you give me today. And Lord, I pray for some of us this morning who find ourselves wrestling with Jesus impersonation, trying to present ourselves as people that have it all together, people who look holy and devoted for all of the world to see, but deep down we know we're just a person wearing a robe these days. Would you meet us where we're at in that, Lord? And as you do, not with condemnation, but with invitation to trust you, to try you, to walk with you in the secret places, and to trust that what happens in the secret places will ultimately reveal in the right times, in the right seasons, in the right places, and look a lot like you in real everyday life in all of the best ways. Would you make us those people? We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey, thanks for watching. If something you heard resonated with you today, we would love to connect with you. Visit doxology.church/connect or leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's message and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.